You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hi. Okay, so today I am joined by Renee Reina, the mom friend you've always wanted. Renee finished her PhD in psychology in March of 2020, just days before the COVID-19 quarantine started. While in quarantine with her son Milo, she gained a large following on TikTok, which is how I found her, with her hysterical mom-related content. With her growing online presence and her own desire for more relatable content, the Mom Room podcast was born. On her podcast, Renee covers topics like it's okay to refuse visitors after giving birth, momposter syndrome, mom guilt, postpartum anxiety, is it okay to fix your baby's unibrow, the hashtag blessed social media moms, and educational episodes with professionals in all things motherhood. Renee and I recorded this episode over the summer of 2021 when her hometown was still in heavy lockdown due to COVID, so you'll hear some of that type of talk in today's episode. You'll also hear us discuss Renee's favorite motherhood topics, many of which I mentioned earlier. We discuss marriage, self-care, communication, mom rage, and Renee's own experience with anxiety that persists to this day. I am so excited for you to hear this episode because while Renee is not a clinician, her PhD, her training, and her research all impact her outlook on motherhood and on life, and it is such a refreshing take. So, as always, stay tuned after for my final thoughts. Here's Renee. Hey, Renee. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
I think I'm going to have to get right into it because I've been following you on TikTok for a while. I've been following you social media. I listened to your podcast, and the overwhelming sense that I get from you is just this self-assurance. And yeah, it's like leading up to this interview, it's just the question that's right here. So I feel like if I don't get it out, I'll just be on my mind. But anytime you're speaking about motherhood, the guilt, the shame, how you handle the tantrums, communication with your husband, and all that, you're very candid about your struggles with it. But like I said, just this sense of self-assurance always comes through, and I'm always wondering how did you become that? I mean, it's amazing. It's a compliment.
Thanks.
But where does that come from?
I honestly, people ask me, usually I get like, you seem so confident. Like, where does that come from? And I feel like I don't know. Like, I feel like I wasn't like that my whole life, but I feel like my dad is that way. And so I think I take after him in that sense. And I think everything that I choose to do, I have already, like, I'm an overthinker.
Okay.
So, like, I've already overthought whatever it is that I'm doing. Like, I've analyzed myself. I've reflected on, like, you know, when it comes to communicating with my husband, like, I have already worked through that issue. And so when I speak about it on the podcast or I write about it on Instagram or make a funny TikTok, like, I've already worked through it, if that makes sense. And
it
so
does.
Even then, like, if someone comes back with, yeah, well, what about this? Or like they try and fight me on something, it's like, I've already probably looked at it from that angle and I can tell you why I don't think that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a lot of self-reflection and just thinking about these things. And then I'm also like, I did research my whole life, you
Right.
know, like grad school. So when it comes to something like screen time, for example, like I have already put in so much time researching this stuff and talking to other experts and other moms and listening to their experiences so I can come to a conclusion and be confident in what I'm doing. And then there are some things that I'm not super confident about, and I will be open about that too because I don't feel shame about them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, oh, I'm struggling in this one little area. Here's some things that I'm trying to do to make it better, but I'm not perfect and I don't pretend to be perfect. And I think that's just like, I was listening to something the other day and they were saying like when you hide something or you don't talk about it, then it's shameful. It's like,
Mm.
you know, it like snowballs into shame inside of you and then it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a thing. Whereas for me, like I don't feel shame over things, so I'm okay with saying, yeah, I hate cooking. And so sometimes we have, you know, less than perfect meals and that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I really commend you because I think that just I think for me, I didn't even realize the areas in which I felt shameful about myself until I really spent time in therapy and listened to all the podcasts and read a bunch of the books. And it was like learning about a version of myself that I didn't even know existed.
Mm,
And so when I'm going through that and then I listen to someone like you or I experience someone like you, my brain then goes to everyone else. It's like, what are they doing? How are they doing this? How are because for me, I know the work that I'm putting in and
mhm.
I can already tell just from listening to your show and getting to know you through social media that you are reflective and you do sit back and think a lot about yourself. And I think it took me a long time to figure that out.
Yeah.
And
I think my schooling, a major thing for me and why I'm that way, I think is my schooling.
mhm,
Like I've been in grad school. I just finished last year, but I was in grad school in psychology for over 10 years.
yeah, yeah,
So I mean,
that would make sense.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so there's certain things that I was trained on that lend themselves to someone looking at themselves and
Hmm.
also looking at other people and being
Yes.
like, you know, when people respond to something a certain way, I can kind of be like, oh, that's interesting, like that they responded that way. And then think about why did they respond that way? Like, what did I say? How did I say it? Like, I'm very reflective in that way because of my training and certain things like attachment. Something that I'm trained in is reflective functioning, which is literally
Yeah.
like the definition of what I do all the time.
Yes.
So, why do people react to things in a certain way? Why do people behave a certain way? Like, how do people reflect on something that happened to them a while ago? How do they explain that?
Hmm.
Like, you know, what kind of like spin do they put on it? And then also defense mechanisms. Like, so interesting.
Yeah.
And so when you go through all this really in-depth training and you're like immersed in it, you can't
Mm.
help but then bring that into your everyday life.
Do you ever feel burdened by that knowledge? And
No, I actually think it's pretty empowering
yeah, yeah, I
because,
can
you
imagine.
know, yeah, like I don't, if I go through a difficult time, and I'll use the example that I talked about recently, um, I called it like martyr tendencies,
Yes,
where,
that was a
you know,
very good episode, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like I went through that experience, and in the moment, it sucks. And I'm like, you know, upset and I'm frustrated, and I don't necessarily understand what's going on. But then shortly afterwards, or even in the moment, I can catch myself
Mm.
and then think through it and adjust my behavior and how I'm going to respond to my husband or like how I'm going to talk to him about it afterwards. And so it really lets you, like, you still have those frustrating and irritable moments, but it lets you get out of it a lot faster. And
Yeah.
instead of like building resentment and getting, like it can snowball into all these things that are more like a chronic issue. I just kind of pop into them, and then usually I can take myself out of it
Yeah.
and then think about it. And then also writing the Instagram posts about it, like recording the podcast episodes, that helps too, because it's me
Processing.
working. Yeah, exactly. It's like
Yeah.
me working through those things and trying to explain it to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And then usually other people are like, oh my God, me too. Like,
Yeah.
exact same feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you, I think, when I started doing, the self work, the self reflection, I did initially feel almost bitter. Like, why, this is great, but why am I the only one in this household doing this work? Why, like, is this fair, that I'm spending all these hours in therapy and reading all this? And I'm like you, I find it very interesting. I didn't go to school for it, but my initial reaction was first intrigue, then bitterness. I was pissed off. Like, I gotta do all this work just so we can stay happy and healthy our whole lives. Like, whatever, dude, But then I did, you start to see how much it works and how much your own work has an effect and infiltrates your other relationships and your parenting. And it does. It really becomes a gift that you can give your partner and your kid. It seems like you and your husband really have a nice team mentality. Is that something that came naturally? How did that work? I know a lot of people struggle, especially when you first have a kid. Your marriage changes dramatically in the dynamics. Can you
Yeah.
speak about that a little bit?
I think the biggest thing with my husband and I is that I think we respect each other.
Mm.
And like, he supports what I'm doing, I support his like career, and he's not so much of a talker. Like, I'm like blah 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 blah. And so a lot of the times, if he responds to me in a defensive way, like, I will point it out to him, but not in a way that causes him to be more defensive.
Right.
I will just be like, sometimes in the moment, I'll just let it go so that we can talk about it after. But I will say, like, okay, well, why did you react that way? All I'm saying is this, like, in the moment, address it. But I think people let things snowball, and then when you don't talk about it openly, you tend to approach your partner in a way that's more, they're going to be defensive because it's more of an attack as opposed to just bringing something up. Yes. Yeah. And yes, that's another thing that I really work on, is to not be reactionary. So if I feel, even on social media, like, people will write a comment or like message me, and my initial response will be like, I get defensive, but I never respond in that moment. I like to let it sit, think about it, and then I'll respond to it. But I think, and like with kids, we already had a really solid relationship before having kids. And I think that is major.
Yeah.
And before we had Milo, my husband was super helpful around the house. I mean, he went to medical school. He lived on his own for so long that he's used to doing his laundry, cooking for himself, like grabbing groceries. Like, this is all, he's used to that. So when we come together, we are like 50-50 because we're both used to living on our own and doing things for ourselves. So it just kind of fit nicely. And then with Milo, having a kid is a huge adjustment. Yeah. And I can see where if there's already conflict, that just kind of heightens the conflict and makes things more stressful. But for us, we didn't have that to begin with. And we were pretty good at, just like you said, approaching it as we're a team and we're going to help each other out just to kind of get to this end goal of making Milo happy and, raising him and having a happy family life. So,
yeah. Well, I don't know your husband, and I'm sure he has a role in this, but I can tell just from speaking with you that your patience, even just with yourself, and your willingness to to reflect, I'm sure has a lot to do with how copacetic your house is on a daily basis.
Yeah.
As, I think too, because, and you've talked about this as well, that oftentimes mom does become the default parent, and we take on a lot of the mental load. I mean, these are all buzzwords right now, and I know you've talked about a lot of them, and I think that a lot of resentment can start to build up in dealing with that. And so, I hate to say it, but it does then fall on us to then take that moment of pause and think about what we want our role to be in the house and how we communicate it, right? It always seems to come back to communication.
I remember in quarantine, Milo had already been in daycare for a while at that point. So I was feeling a lot better with regard to I had my own things going. I was finishing up school. I felt more so like I had my life back and I was able to do things on my own, and Milo was going to school. We had a routine. But in quarantine, when I was now all of a sudden stuck at home with Milo and my husband was doing his regular job, all these things kind of got heightened because now it was the opposite. I was stuck at home. My husband still had his regular job. And I remember I had to think so many times because I was so irritated when my husband would come home from work or on the weekends, so irritated. And I was like, hey, Renee, why are you so frustrated? My husband's not doing anything wrong.
Right.
Because it's not wrong. But I had to sit and be like, you know what? It drives me nuts when it's Saturday. I've been home with Milo all week, can't even leave the house, and you go out to cut the grass.
Right. And it takes 3 hours somehow.
Yes. Rage. Yes, and so I literally had to say, you know what? I think I'm going to start cutting the grass.
And he was like, that too.
Yes. And he was like, really? Okay. I had never cut grass before in my life.
I would shovel snow too. Just throwing that out there.
Yes, 100%. And I would put on my podcast and I would go out, shovel or cut the grass. But I had to recognize that instead of, him coming home and me being in a bad mood and taking it out on him and us not talking about it and resentment just keep building and building, I had to figure out what I wanted and why I was irritated and then communicate that to him. And then, if your partner is understanding and wanting to help, they should be able to accommodate your request if it's reasonable, right?
Yeah. So
little things like that, I was like, I'll never forget that. I am cutting the grass from now on.
I got the leaf blower out. I got the weed whacker. My neighbors must think I'm nuts. I'm like, no, I'm just avoiding my children for 2 hours. I know.
Exactly.
Do you have any advice or tips for anyone who's listening to this and going, oh my God, that sounds amazing. Where would I even start? Just in terms of how you've come to this place of self-reflection and just being able to take that pause, because it doesn't come easy to be. I mean, at least in my experience, it takes a lot of work.
I think for me, I am usually in a great mood. I'm bubbly, I'm energetic, and so when there is a shift in that feeling, I know that there's something wrong.
Interesting.
So I will notice it right away. And I take a mental note of the situation. And then in the moment, if I have time, I will think about why I feel that way, what just happened. And how could that situation have happened and me not have felt irritated? You know what I mean?
Yes.
So was it something my husband did? Is it because I have a certain expectation of what's going to happen right now and it didn't happen? But if my husband doesn't know what my expectation was, then it's not his fault. I need to communicate that to him. So I go through all these things and think about it. And
self-aware.
Yeah. And if you can't do it in the moment, which sometimes you can't, then I would think about it, later that night. Take, 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, think about things that make you irritated, when you find yourself being in a low mood as opposed to your usual self, what's going on in those moments and how can you communicate that to your partner and have a conversation about it instead of being reactionary, being defensive, being grumpy, taking it out on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And books, I think there's so many great podcasts now and
know, yeah.
so many great books that you can read to, like I did all this reading in grad school for training. And at the time it just felt like work and not, something beneficial to me, but it was so beneficial. And I'm so happy I did all that training, but I'm sure you could get similar, books and whatnot from the bookstore.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a ton of podcasts out now too, like
Mm-hmm.
you said. And yeah, there's certain either therapists or psychologists that, I'm thinking of like Harriet Lerner and Brene Brown. I mean, they have on their own, they have libraries, of
Exactly.
all different topics. I mean, I think Harriet Lerner has an entire book on anger. And I was thinking about it listening to your Mom Rage episode. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you got to buy it. You got to read it, just because I don't know. I feel like even if you take one thing from a book and it helps you or it helps change your mindset or a podcast, whatever it is, then it was worth your time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just to look at things in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that through this whole experience with quarantine and COVID, and I guess where you guys are still not quite out of it yet. I
Yeah,
mean,
so they just lifted lockdown and I think stores are going to be opening soon. But
oh my
yeah, we have
goodness.
just been for like over a year, it's just been, up and
Yeah.
down. And even when they did open things, like there's lineups everywhere. There's all these regulations that like
Yeah.
stores can only have a certain amount of people, and it's just not been the same at
Yeah.
all. So it's really been like over a year of just living life in a much different way.
Yeah. Does anything stick out to you about maybe what you've learned about yourself or your home life or anything that has changed or that you've learned over this time?
I think I adapt well to different situations.
Mm-hmm.
I also, and I've known this about myself before, but I don't think it matters where I live.
Interesting.
Like my husband, like as long as I'm with my husband,
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. So like in quarantine, that's been our life because
Yeah.
we can't have people over, we
Right.
can't go do things.
Right.
So it's really just been us in our
Mm-hmm.
house. And like I'm totally fine with it. I remember a few years ago, I moved out west to Victoria, BC with my husband for his work, and we were just by ourselves. We didn't have any friends, like we didn't have anything, and I
Mm-hmm.
was perfectly happy. So that's a good thing, but also I adapt to situations and I think I need to be busy because
Interesting.
the second I finished my PhD and quarantine hit, I was like, boom, like
Yeah.
just started doing all the mom room stuff and did not stop and still have not stopped. And so clearly I need to be very busy.
Yeah, I've heard you describe yourself as a busybody.
Oh
Just
yeah, like
can't
big
stop
time.
moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that definitely, it's like, what did you do in quarantine? It's like, oh, well, I completely changed my life and started doing something else because I couldn't, if quarantine didn't happen, I would probably have a regular job in Toronto doing research.
Interesting.
But this
Yeah.
happened and so now I'm just doing this and yeah, I love it. So
Yeah. You had the blog before this started though, correct?
yeah.
It was the TikTok now podcast, all of that blew up during quarantine.
Yeah, I started TikToking more in quarantine and then just putting more effort into Instagram and into the blog and then started the podcast
Yeah.
all in quarantine.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Has anything surprised you about your experience on TikTok or getting to know other moms or the community that you've built on social media?
It's funny because I never used to consume mom content at
Hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
Like people after I had Milo, people would be like, "Oh my God, do you follow Kat and Nat? Do you like, this and that?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know who any of these people are," because I didn't use social media in that way. It was like I followed my friends and family, and I followed like Justin Bieber and, like Lady Gaga. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't like consume influencer content.
Mm-hmm.
So I have really, I guess my eyes have been opened to like the influencer world and how that is such a big thing. And that's been really shocking to me. And then just, slowly growing on social media, how much you get contacted by like whether it's brands or other influencers or
Me.
yeah.
Hey,
Yeah,
Renee, can you come be on my podcast?
except I like podcast is like my thing. So I welcome those messages
Good,
all
good,
the time.
I'm glad.
But yeah, it's wild. And you start to feel it's a little bit awkward at first because you're like, who am I? Like I'm just, sharing stuff on social media, but you're constantly getting asked for things and it's really awkward. Especially I think women have a hard time with saying no to people and like setting boundaries. And so that has been eye-opening for me and something that I'm getting much better at. But at first it was like, ugh, like it's awkward. And if you said yes to everybody, like you would literally just be a 24/7 commercial or like promoting things just because people asked you to.
Yeah.
So
it wouldn't feel authentic to you.
Yeah. So that's been really the most shocking thing, I would say. And the more I learn about this industry, the more I'm just like, wow, like my brain explodes.
Yeah. And you're writing a book.
Trying to, yes.
What is your book about?
So what I want to do is basically take all the topics that I talk about all the time. So mom guilt, like being the default parent, saying no to visitors after giving birth. Like I have a ton of topics that I talk about a lot or I write about on my blog or on Instagram and TikTok about. So I wanted each of those topics to be a chapter. And so it's not going to be a book that's like, flows from beginning to end. It's like each chapter is its own topic. And yeah, that's about it. But
Okay.
I really need to find time to sit and write. And that's been a struggle,
Yeah.
which is so weird because I'm so used to doing that, like being from academia. But now I'm just like podcasts, like TikTok, social media, like I'm all over the place. And so it's hard to just sit and focus.
Yeah.
But hopefully this summer I have pre-recorded a bunch of podcast episodes. So I'm hoping that this summer I'll have more time to just like sit and write.
Yeah, this world can be consuming, It's like you get started on one thing. Oh, let me look up this thing on Instagram real quick, and 20 minutes later you've scrolled and watched everyone's story and replied. And it's like,
I know. You literally need to like shut off your internet, shut off your like turn your phone on airplane mode and just sit there. But I just can't bring myself to do it yet. So my parents are building a house up north. And so when that's done, I feel like I just want to bring Milo there for a while and my mom can watch Milo and I'll just sit there and write.
Yes. Yeah.
That's my plan.
Nice. Very nice. You, I have to say, I was catching up on some of your episodes and I was laughing because you talked about momposter syndrome, and one of the ways that presents is through the hashtag blessed mom situation of people. And it's so funny. I practically spit out my water because I was trying to, for so long, explain to my therapist a group of women that I know in real life, but she was suggesting to me that I, maybe reach out to more women. It was during quarantine when I really was like in the bubble, and I was trying to explain to her why I didn't want to. And on paper, these women seemed like the perfect fit, the kids, the husband, the quarantine, the whole thing. And I finally was like, they're just too hashtag blessed for me. Like, I'm not going to be able to look at them and say, I hate my husband today, and trust that they know I don't really hate my husband, because I'll never get that feedback back from them. I'm curious, I don't know if this is the right way to phrase this, but what, especially in the social media world, like what do we do with these kinds of accounts? I don't know what to do with them. I have a hard time, because I know that there's a person behind that account, but it's hard for me to not just see it as an account. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I look at those accounts as a form of entertainment and nothing more.
Okay.
So if I were to pick up an issue of Vogue or like People magazine with, these highly curated and edited photos, I treat it the exact same way. So I do follow some of these accounts because I'm like, oh, I love the way she decorates her house. I love the way her kids look in matching outfits, but it's literally just entertainment. And it's just because I like looking at pretty photos sometimes. For the most part, I follow accounts that are more so like my own account, which is just like everyday life. But yeah, the thing about accounts, or even it can also be people, like you said, in your real life who present that way. Like very #blessed. It's not like they're doing anything wrong. When I see people like that, I just see someone who's uncomfortable telling people what their struggles are, or what you know what I mean? Like people like to, especially on Facebook, like people like to just show things that are good and make it look like everything is great in their life, because they fear judgment from other people, or what other people are going to say or assume about them if they talk about difficult things, right? Not even difficult things, but like, for example, me, I put out a post a while back that was about how my husband and I don't sleep in the same bed since having Milo. And it was uncomfortable. I was like, oh, I feel awkward sharing this, because I don't want people to see that and think like, oh, there's trouble in their marriage, because that couldn't be further from the truth. But I was like, no, I bet you lots of other people live this way after having kids, because you just want to sleep. And like, if my husband makes a noise while he's sleeping, I will murder him. So it just works for us. And after I made that post, so many people wrote in the comments like, oh, we haven't slept together in years. Like, we have separate bedrooms. Like, because when you have kids, you literally, sleep becomes so important. So yeah, I think people are just not comfortable sharing those things. And it could be people on their social media accounts. And I think a lot of people get sucked into their social media accounts, turn into their job. And so they're kind of handcuffed as to what they can share, because they don't want to lose like those collaborations and whatnot with brands. And
people come to expect something from them in a certain way.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I think, like, yeah, you can find them on social media. You can also find them in real life. And I think it's just they're not comfortable sharing what we all know that we're all going through.
Yeah, I have to say, I have to remind myself of that. I find myself less and less the more I'm aware of it, but originally feeling very triggered. Very like, why is this so hard for me? And you have that. You're looking like that. Or I can't even something as simple as taking a photo of my toddler. I'm like, how do you have these perfectly staged photos in these dresses and these cute things? Like, and it really what it was what is wrong with me that I can't have my toddler do what I want her to do and take this beautiful photo with my family and this and that. And I as I'm saying that, I work through it and I realize how off base it is. There's nothing wrong with me, right? Like, right? But
have you ever seen Jillian Harris's stories sometimes when she kind of shoots behind the scenes of a photo shoot?
Not in a little bit, but yes, I've seen it.
It is absolute mayhem. Yeah. And so it's like, that is her job. Yeah. Okay, to get these photos, to put out these photos. Mm-hmm. She will go through that chaos to get those photos because that's her job.
Right.
Me?
I will not.
I don't care enough
Yeah.
to get those photos
Yeah.
to go through that like few hours of
Right.
chaos.
Right.
So you also have to look at it in that way. Like, I could make the meals that one of my friends on my Instagram, she's vegan, she makes like this, like they're simple, like super nutritious meals. I could do that if I wanted to take the time to do that.
Right.
And I could set up lighting, I could take the beautiful photos like she takes, but I don't want to. And
Right.
like, you have to be okay telling yourself that you don't want to do those things, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, we don't, like, she doesn't do some things that I do,
Right.
and I don't do things that she does because we have different priorities. Like, food is her big interest, it's not mine. Like, you know, so it's, I think a lot of the times we see all these different accounts that are geared towards different things. So like, oh, this girl's really good at decorating her house. This girl's really good at creating like nutritious, beautiful looking plates. And then we think that we have to do all these things that all these accounts are doing, and we're one person.
Yeah.
It's like,
That's exhausting. Yeah.
I run a podcast and it's a full-time thing, and people are like, oh my God, like, how do you do a podcast? And it's like, well, that is my number one priority. That is what I spend all my time doing.
Yeah.
And we don't have nice looking meals ever.
Right.
And our house is a disaster.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's how I have this really good podcast.
I appreciate that honesty. I really do. Because you start to just see, even knowing you from what I know on social media, I can still see you doing what you're doing with your brand and your podcast and all of that, and still wonder, I wonder if her house is clean. You know, like it. And you have to just, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I feel like I need to know, you know, like, okay, her house isn't clean. Okay, so mine's not clean either. And now I'm going to do this podcast and have a dirty house. Like, I can't.
I'm like, wow, look at your shoes behind you. They're all lined up perfectly. I'm like, wow.
Because I haven't worn them in 3 years.
Fair enough.
Like, they're heels. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I've been pregnant and quarantined for 3 years. They have not seen the light of day in a very long time. I know. I like to look at them, but hopefully I'll get back in them soon. Speaking of all this, do you consider yourself an influencer?
I think I'm a pretty, like, funny influencer, because I laugh because people ask, you know, like, where I got a certain t-shirt or my leggings or
like, swipe up.
Which makes me laugh because like I don't obviously spend a lot of time on what I'm wearing, and sometimes people ask about things in my house, and I think it's just, the more eyes you have on you, the more people, there's going to be people out there who are curious, like, where'd you get that? Where'd you get that? Like, that's just what happens. But yeah, I would hope that I'm more so an influencer of like changing how people think about themselves and think about motherhood, and, you know, inspire people to have conversations with their partner that they wouldn't otherwise have, and less of, like, look at my t-shirt that I'm wearing. But
I think influencer has taken on a negative interpretation and a negative connotation,
which is weird, because if someone's an influencer, like, they have spent a lot of time building their platform, and it's like, you know, if we see Eva Longoria in a Pantene commercial, she's getting paid to promote this product that we all know she does not use Pantene products. Or like, no, the best is when they're promoting boxed hair dye. And I'm like, you're telling me that Eva Longoria dyes her hair out of a box? Unlikely. But we don't think anything of that.
Right.
But then you can have someone else who has built this massive platform on Instagram promote some product, and we're like, oh, how dare you?
Right.
And it's like, well, it's the same thing. It's been going on forever. It's just moved platforms, and now it's people that are not your traditional celebrity that are promoting products. So yeah, I don't know what I'm answering anymore, but that's my rant about.
It made a lot of sense, though, because you're right. We don't. There's absolutely no way Eva Longoria is using boxed hair dye. No.
Not a chance.
Nope. You're right. Gosh. Well, you've influenced me to think about things differently in that regard. So I guess you are an influencer, Renee. Is there anything that you feel like, so we've talked about, you know, you have your friend who's the vegan food goddess, and then we have other friends who have the perfect, or friends or whatever, people we know and see that have the family photos and the this and the that. Then we've got like our crafty moms. What is your mom wheelhouse? Like, what do you get in an A+ in mom life?
I think I'm fun. And it's funny because I talk a lot about not enjoying playing with Milo.
Which is totally fine, by the way.
It's so normal. Like, I'm an adult. Yes, I find it difficult to play with my toddler, of course. It's not interesting to me, but I like to see him happy. So I do it, right? But yeah, I would say like my biggest thing is I'm fun. Like, I can have fun with Milo, make him laugh, like keep him interested, keep him engaged. And it's funny because I'm the first person to say like I don't like playing, but I also, like, yesterday he came home from school and we made yogurt pops. Like, he helped me put everything in the blender. We like blended it up. Like, I'm really good at getting him involved in doing things to make him feel like he's helping, to keep him like entertained. It's a lot of work and I don't do it all the time, but I think I'm really good at being fun, like dancing with him and just being
your 90s,
silly.
90s dance parties.
That is where I shine. Or the Wiggles.
Yeah. Mine are not into the Wiggles yet, at least. I don't know.
They have some good songs.
I know, it's a whole experience. That, and what's the other one? Blippi, and I don't know.
Yeah, we're on the Blippi train right now, which, like, he has good songs, but I really am looking forward to the Wiggles coming back. Like, we should have seen them this past fall, because every year they come to Canada and perform. And I was like just devastated. Like, first the Justin Bieber concert and now the Wiggles canceled. And so I'm just waiting for them to come back so that we can take Milo. It's going to be so fun.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about the A+ in momming is fun, and I can totally see that about you. I mean, your personality comes through on your videos, and your podcast tends to be more, I think, the studious Renee a little bit, you know, and your research. But on TikTok, I mean, you're hysterical. Is there, what would you say are you triggered by most in motherhood? What like really gets under your skin?
Sleep. Nighttime. And it's funny because Milo was a pretty good sleeper. He still is. But those phases we had where he would have a hard time going down for his nap, and I think eventually I let all of that go and it really made things a lot easier, but I would be so triggered and stressed out and frustrated and irritated when I felt like we had to be on this specific schedule. Like, he needs to nap between this time and this time. And so your whole day is focused on getting them to nap at certain times and trying to put them down. And if they don't want to sleep, it's like so stressful. It feels like the end of the world. And so eventually at one point I was like, this is dumb. Like, my husband comes home from work and I'm so irritated. All I've been doing all day, is like stressing out, trying to get Milo to sleep when he doesn't want to sleep. So I just started not caring about it so much. And in the evenings as well, we did that for a while, just like not letting it get to us so much. And it's like, okay, Renee, what's the big deal? You're going to go to bed a little bit later than you usually would because Milo's having a rough night. Get over it. But for some reason, once it hits nighttime and things aren't going as I expected them to go, it's like stresses me out. So sleep and brushing teeth for sure.
Just brush your teeth.
The worst.
I know.
And like, he goes through phases of being so good at brushing his teeth and letting me brush his teeth. And then he goes through phases of just, it's a nightmare. And it drives me nuts. And my husband is so relaxed about it and I'm not. And so like sometimes I'll throw like legit tantrum, like, and my husband's like, relax, okay? And I get so worked up about it.
Well, and then I don't know about you, but as soon as my husband, you know, with all good intentions, more or less says relax, I'm like, what'd you say now? What?
Like,
real what?
Relaxed.
There's no relaxing. No. But I think like you said, I think by the end of the day, any ounce of patience that we've had, it's like just keeps getting punched and punched and punched, and then at night it's like you're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. You're seeing the kid go into the bed. You're gonna have your hour or two of doing whatever you want, and when it doesn't go to plan, I'm not even gonna hesitate and say this. It can be devastating.
Yeah.
Like it's what at least for me, what I've sometimes looked forward to all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, it's easier with Milo in daycare because I have all day to get things done that I want to get done. So if the evening is a little bit off, it's not as big of a deal. But in quarantine,
Oh yeah,
that was a big
was
deal.
like next level, and
Yeah.
that was just crazy. But you've also been candid about your experience with anxiety, medication. I want to make sure we touch on this because it's definitely one of the things that I appreciated about you speaking about so openly. I think that unfortunately there's still a lot of stigma around medication, seeking help, even about what anxiety looks like, feels like, manifests as. And if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes and talking about your experience, I'd appreciate it.
So anxiety started for me just with, it was very situational. So presentations in school where I had to like speak in front of the class, or big meetings somewhere where I would have to like give my input on something or talk in front of a group of people. And then it just started, like over the years, it just started getting more and more intense and generalizing to other things. So once I like managed to finish my undergrad degree, and I did the honors route, so I had to do the thesis and the dissertation and defend in front of like the whole class, and people were like grilling you with questions. Like it was,
I'm getting anxious thinking about it.
my worst nightmare. Okay. And so I managed to just get through that. And then I went into my master's program in Ottawa. And then I realized that like grad school is literally all presentations. That's literally what it is. So I would try so hard to like build my schedule. Yeah. I was like trying to select classes that didn't have a presentation as part of the like what they grade you on, but I like it was impossible. So the
what
first
was
semester,
it about the presentations that got you?
honestly, I wish I could explain this because rationally in my brain, I was like, Renee, what's the worst that can happen? If you get up in front of the class and you barf all over the place, then they're going to feel bad for you and you get to go home. Like, it's not a big deal. What is going to happen? But I would just, if I got scheduled for a presentation, it could be like 3 months down the road. Once I had that date locked in that I had to present that day, it was like panic. Like it could be a random Friday night and I'm just watching a movie by myself at home and I would have like panic attack, like crying nonstop, like having to call my mom, like brutal. And so finally, at the end of the first semester of my master's program, I was going to drop out and not do grad school anymore because I was like, I can't get through all these presentations. And then because it wasn't just you're anxious that one day, like, okay, be anxious that one day, get it over with. It was like nonstop. As soon as I had those presentations locked in and like lab meetings all the time at the hospital, and it was just so much. So I spoke to one of my friends and she had mentioned that she took citalopram for anxiety. She was in medical school at the time. And I was like, oh, wow. So I made an appointment with my family doctor back home. And I specifically remember the day, like getting in my car, going to drive to his office to talk to him about anxiety and like to ask to be put on this medication to try it. And like halfway there, I just broke down crying in the car and I had to go pick up my mom at home to come with me.
Oh.
So like I drove back home. My mom, it was like a morning appointment. My mom's like still in her pajamas and I'm like bawling my eyes out. I'm like, Mom, you have to come with me. And she's like, oh God. And she's like trying to get ready to come with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went to that appointment, like couldn't barely talk. I was just like bawling and he gave me the prescription for citalopram and it was literally life-changing. So I've been on that for years. I've tried to get off of it a couple times, like wean myself off of it, and then anxiety just comes back. And even in like a generalized way.
Mm.
But it's weird because it always had like, my husband and I would go for dinners with other physicians, like for his work and stuff. And they would be like, oh, and what do you do? And I was like, oh, I'm doing my PhD in psychology. And they'd be like, oh, like, what's your research about? And it was like dread. Like, I'm going to
Panic.
die. I
Yeah.
can't talk. Like, as soon as it
Wow.
had something to do with school, it was just terrible. So yeah, I also have clonazepam, which is more of like a situational thing. So if I
Okay.
know that I have some big presentation coming up, I can take one of those and then it just brings me to like a baseline
Mm-hmm.
level.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's been absolutely life-changing. And what I noticed too is, like you were saying, anxiety can present in different ways. And it's not just these big like panic attacks and the typical feelings of anxiety. It can
Mm-hmm.
be like irritability and, having moments of like feeling rage inside your body. And it's not just, feeling nervous.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than that. So yeah, like my quality of life has been so much better.
Yeah.
And like finished school, like it was just life changing.
Do you have any specific, I don't want to, I use the word triggers a lot, but for me, I start to feel it when I'm have less patience with the kids and I'm not normally a yeller, but all of a sudden I'll feel this need, almost like an impulse to just yell. And I've gotten so much better about not yelling, but even internally, I am yelling. Like, is there, and that's usually my little like, oh, hello, okay, we gotta check in here. Is there anything like that for you in your daily life, or even if it's not daily, but that as soon as it starts to happen, or happens once or twice, you're like, oh, Renee, okay, we're getting a little, I don't know what the word, antsy, or
Yeah,
we're getting a little, we gotta check in.
I definitely have times where, like, I know when I'm in a space where I can deal with a lot versus there's days where I know that I'm irritable and
Yeah.
things are going to really bother me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it has something to do with like my cycle and hormones, but
Mm.
anyways, like I can tell my husband I'm super irritable today and like I just don't feel like myself. And so he can kind of take on more stuff or,
Mm-hmm.
be home earlier, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I know exactly what you're talking about because there's days where I could have a horrible day, but my attitude is like super
Yes.
happy and
You
I'm like,
deal.
I
Yes.
can deal with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing really phases me. And then there's other days where like the dog's barking when Milo's having a meltdown, like I
Yeah.
will lose my mind. I will put them in their houses, bring them to the basement. Like I can't
I feel
deal with
like
certain
it's
things.
literally like a light switch. I'm
Yeah.
just like, tick, oh, we're set off,
Yeah.
you know? And I definitely think my experience, and I'm trying to be actually more aware of it, but it's very closely tied to my cycle.
Yeah.
I find that
Yeah.
with a lot of women I talk to too, which is just one more thing for us
Yeah. Yeah.
to deal
Hey,
with.
yeah. And it's funny because it always starts as that, like you were saying, that initial like light switch, like, okay, like I'm so ragey.
Yes.
And then it usually ends in me just crying now because
Yeah.
I'm upset at myself for
Yes.
feeling that way or like yelling at Milo or,
Mm-hmm.
acting a certain
Or
way. And so,
frustration, I'm
yes.
just like, gosh,
And
it's
that
frustrating.
episode that I did with Jen about the rage and motherhood,
Yeah, that was
something she
really
said
good.
that made so much sense was that we have those responses because we feel like we're not in power. And so,
Mm.
like, when you slam a door, when you yell, like, you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to be in power in those moments. And you can just see that happening with toddlers, especially because they don't want you to be in power and they will
Mm-hmm.
go against everything that you're saying. They act out, they'll hit you, you know what I mean? And so you feel so helpless and
Yeah.
not in power in certain situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so you try to get that power, but then you feel bad for acting that way. And it's like, then you just end up in tears. And I wait for my husband to get home. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's reminding me too, just to, circle it back around to, I think where we started with the Martyr Syndrome is, it reminds me of that because that feeling of, I'll just do it myself.
mhm,
That's, that's about feeling a little out of control and feeling like, I don't have power over what that person's thinking and doing and feeling. So in a way, I'm trying to reclaim it by by saying, I'll just do it,
Mm-hmm.
and you're, at least with that, you're almost trying to passive aggressively
Mm-hmm.
communicate how you're struggling. I mean, it's a strange thing in a way. Like we're taking on more to communicate that we're struggling. It's
Yep.
very messed up.
And usually the other person has no
No
clue.
clue. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we're just like, I always think about moments where, you're feeling that way, and then you almost want your partner to do something that's gonna make you even
Yeah.
more angry,
Yeah.
because then it
It's
like,
like,
oh, like,
go ahead, say something
yeah,
stupid. Go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah.
because then that, makes you feel like you're more in power, and it's like a vicious cycle that you get yourself into, when really you could just easily snap out of it by, you know,
Hmm.
saying something and not taking on more and suffering in silence, as I
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
How do you how do you take care of yourself when you're in those moments or coming out of those moments of feeling ragey, or just in general? Are there things that you've found that just make you feel better?
Yeah. I
What are they?
always like, I communicate most things to my husband. So if I had a bad day, if I'm, not feeling good about whatever, like something that happened with Milo, I usually like cry to my husband about it and talk to him, and like just relax. Even with work stuff, like I will go, 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 go. And then there'll be a day where I'm just like, nope. Like
Yeah.
I just need to lay down and not do anything, go for a
Hmm.
walk, do stuff that I want to do. And I've always been like that, even in school. Like I will work, 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 like over prepare. And then I just don't do anything for like 4 days. And that's just kind of been how I work. So I listen to my body for sure. Like if
Yeah.
I need a break, then I take a break. If I, you know, like feel like I need to start taking vitamins, then I take vitamins. If I feel like I need to like go eat McDonald's, I go eat McDonald's. Like I'm
Go with the
very,
flow.
yeah, just like what do I need? What do I want to do? Every single night I take alone time in the dark. Since Milo was born, I watch reality TV by myself in the dark
Oh my
every single
goodness.
night.
That sounds like a dream come true.
Every single night. And I so look forward to that moment because I'm not doing work. My phone is not on. I'm in the dark. Like my humidifier's going, and I'm just like peacefully
Oh my
watching my
goodness.
Real Housewives. Yeah,
Oh
I love it.
my god. How
Yeah.
long are you watching for?
Like up to an hour.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I go upstairs at about 9:30, and then by like 10:30 I'll turn everything off and go to bed.
Oh my goodness. That's
Hmm.
sounds like heaven. And no peep about it from your husband, not like, oh, you don't want to spend time with me. It's just
No.
you both know this
'Cause
is what you need and it's okay.
for him, because he comes home from work, we're together nonstop until about 9:30 at night,
Hmm.
and or sometimes like he's on call a lot, so sometimes he's not even home, but we're together till like 9:30, and then when I go upstairs, he has his alone time now to
Yeah.
watch basketball or whatever he's watching, and I think we both kind of enjoy the having that alone time.
Yeah. It's very nice to hear. It's very secure in your relationship, and I'm I mean, you don't need this from me, but I'm happy for you. It makes
Oh,
me
thanks.
happy to hear that you've found a way to get your time in. I know, myself included, moms really struggle to get that alone time and get that time to recharge, and I don't know, I'm like giddy for you. I'm like excited that you get that, and it's nice, and now I have to figure out how I'm gonna get that.
Yeah, I never thought that, some people might feel not pressured, but like they have to spend time with their partner, or, but I never even thought about that in that way. We
Yeah.
just kind of like fell into doing this. And once I started doing it, I was like, this is the best.
Yeah. I think for us it's not so much a pressure. We're just, my husband and I were just different. I have always liked and needed alone time, whereas he is generally the more the merrier all the time.
Mm,
So, and he also he's much more equipped than I am at finding his alone time I believe he might hear this and go, what are you talking about? But in my perspective, he's able to grab those moments of downtime for himself in much shorter increments than I feel like I require them for myself. You know, I feel like I'm also very like, okay, once we do this, then we do that, and then we do this, and then we do that. And whereas he's more, okay, I can get 15 minutes to read or be on my phone and play a game right now. I'm going to take it. Even though there's like a mess in the sink. I'm like, no, I need to clean the sink first, and then I can do it. And usually by the time I clean the sink, the time I had to take that alone time, it's gone. So it's on me. I know that. It's not on him. But, you know, I think it's just our personalities are different, you know. But we're working on it. I'm working on it is more what it is. So, Renee, is there anything that you would have asked yourself or wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up?
Oh, gosh. I don't think so. No.
Good. Excellent.
We covered some good stuff.
Yeah, we did. Would you tell everyone where they can find you and all of your good stuff going on?
Yes. So I am on Instagram and TikTok at the.mom.room. And then the podcast has its own pretty little Instagram account, and it's at the Mom Room Podcast. The podcast is called the Mom Room Podcast. You can find it everywhere you listen to podcasts. How many times can I say the word podcast? And
do it one more time just for fun.
Yeah, podcast. And yeah, the blog is reneereina.com. You can get to that through my Instagram account as well. But yeah, that's about it. I'm mostly on Instagram storying throughout the day, so come say hello.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I like I said, I follow you, and I feel like I know you very well. So it's and I mean that in a good way. I mean, it's usually like I'm usually jumping on Instagram when I need just like a moment of break from whatever is going on, and then I see like, I don't know, you and Milo are doing something. I'm like, yeah, I was just doing that. Okay, all right, we're gonna keep going. We got it.
We're all doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. I love talking to you, and good luck with that book.
Thank you.
Confidence, clarity, and authenticity are all words that come to mind when I reflect on this conversation, when I consume Renee's content on social media, and when I listen to her podcast. She naturally does what I've learned to do through therapy, and that is to truly self-reflect. And you know, it's funny because I don't think that prior to therapy, I would have said that I was not a self-reflective person. I think I've always been pretty in tune with my feelings. But the key difference is, to me, is that the reflection feels to be at a much deeper level, and perhaps that has to do with age. But, you know, I've come to understand how to best reflect for me. But also, it's knowing what to do once I've done the reflecting. You know, we can sit here and reflect on our thoughts, our emotions, our communication styles, and etc. all day. But it's the then knowing what to do next that takes some guidance, some support, and most importantly, practice. Renee's training, her research, her studies, and I'm going to throw in there her innate personality, all come together to guide her through the next steps of that process. And I think Renee would want me to say here that she's not perfect at it. She has a PhD in this stuff, and she's not on it 100% of the time. No one is perfect. And that's her whole message. Her whole platform is based on there not being a perfect way of doing motherhood. So I'm going to link all of the fabulous resources and specific episodes of Renee's podcast that we talked about today. They're so good. Please go listen to them. I'm also going to link my research. I'm thinking of Renee doing all her research. No, my resource page on my website that has some books and podcast episodes that I recommend. So check them out if you haven't already. And here is my shameless plug for you to please go over to Instagram, go over to TikTok, and throw me, and Renee while you're at it, a follow. I am busting my butt making reels for Instagram and different videos for TikTok, and I'd appreciate the love. Oh, and on that note, Renee mentions that her handles are @themomroom, but since we recorded this episode, she changed them to her name. at Renee Reina _ on Instagram and TikTok, and you can follow her podcast at the Mom Room Podcast on Instagram. Once again, all of this is linked. So thank you, Renee, for your time, for your insight. It was so valuable to me, and I hope you all got just as much out of it as I did. And I will get ya, catch ya, all the things next time. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.